Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Sermon Preparation Workshop here from St. Martin in the Fields. I'm joined by the Reverend Dr. Sam Wells. Hi, Sam. How are you?
I'm well, and I'm going to start with a question for you this
Oh,
week,
gosh.
because for those who weren't paying attention, Jolly stole the show on Sunday with a dramatic poem. Would that be the right way to describe it, with
I think so.
musical accompaniment? And I thought I'd ask the expert what he feels about whether a drama is, what part of the service does that take the place of? Does it take the place of the readings, of the sermon? Is it a sort of sermon? Is it a kind of proclamation of the word? Obviously, it could be a lament, it could be a gloria, it could be a psalm. But what did you think you were doing? I suppose it was absolutely wonderful, but I'd be interested what you felt was happening, and in what sense it was worship.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think for me, whilst we did take out two of the readings, I didn't think it was necessarily replacing the readings specifically. I guess I think of it more like an anthem in some ways, like sort of. But in our case this week, it's sort of prior to the sermon thing rather than sort of.
You try speaking to the choir director about taking out the anthem. I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, no chance. But I think that it has that sort of role to play that is a kind of creative, either, I guess, complement to the other liturgical aspects, such as the readings and or the sermon. And I think for a thematic thing for us, because it was our patronal festival, it had that role to play that created some space to engage with the story that we were telling about ourselves that day in a creative way, perhaps rather than a heady, thinky way, in a sort of gut way, as you might say.
I think that's I think the anthem analogy is very good. Yeah, great.
Well, thank you. I
do watch it back for those who haven't yet. Where were you?
Something to do. Sam, I want to talk to you because we're looking at the 16th of November today. So if you are in the UK, in the Church of England, then this is earmarked, should you wish, to look at, to mark Safeguarding Sunday. A relatively recent innovation, I believe, in the Church of England, is that?
This will be the second one.
Right, well, there we go. So tell me, if you can, anything about, one, why we have it marked as a day, and two, how you might approach it if you are planning on properly marking it.
I think it's a very good idea for a number of reasons. I'll just start with two. First of all, because it's no secret that the Church of England has stumbled over historic cases, and unfortunately and tragically, while these historic cases are deeply troubling, the witch hunt of trying to find people to blame for them has rather obscured the more important work, which is to prevent circumstances in which such things can happen around the church going forward. And Safeguarding Sunday, must acknowledge failures of the past. But, round about this time last year, at the very highest level, leaders of the church were challenged on public media repeatedly, and with questions like, is the Church of England safeguarding fit for purpose? And I'm sorry to say, didn't answer yes. Whereas I think the answer is yes. The answer certainly isn't that it always has been. But that's a different question. And it's very, very discouraging because, there are, 16,000 parishes in the Church of England, give or take, every single one of which has a safeguarding officer. So, the number of volunteers who are giving extensive time, attention, training, and culture change to this, and then basically to be told a year ago that it's useless and they're hopeless, I thought was just very unfortunate. I understand how it came about, but I think it came about through a media frenzy and not through, a realistic recognition of the immense culture change in recent years. And I've said before, and I don't mind saying here, that I think the person most responsible for that culture change for the better is Justin Welby. Given the sad story of past failures, I think some degree of lament's appropriate. But I think to focus the church's attention on a future culture change, or current and future culture change, is very appropriate. And I think the second reason why I think it's a good idea is because the main Sunday act of worship is where most people engage with the church. And so if you don't do it the main Sunday act of worship, you've got to try and explain why not. I don't think there's a very good reason. So I think I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm for preachers, which is obviously our subject this afternoon. I think it's a very good discipline to try and put this in a theological framework, because our response to risk and failure in the church has been more or less the same as the response to risk and failure in other organizations and in society more widely, which is salvation by risk assessment and risk register and training and certification and watching videos and going to courses. And of course, those things are important. But it's really about a change of heart and imagination, and courses and so on can evoke that. But testimony and theological narration, I think, does a better job. So we have the opportunity for that. If you just started a sermon on the 2nd of February by saying, by telling a story or by quoting some statistics, I think people would think, well, what are you doing? Even after the make-in stuff. But on Safeguarding Sunday, they'd think that's exactly what you should be doing. So I think it absolutely behoves preachers. I think the only thing wrong with Safeguarding Sunday as it stands is that the lectionary readings are supremely inappropriate.
Yeah.
So, you can go on the web and find Safeguarding Sunday and find other suggestions. I think we probably here should make a couple of suggestions. I think, the psalm that talks about being kept in the shadow of God's wings, the Matthew 6 that talks about even the hairs on your head are counted. I think these are the kinds of places you might want to go. Because it's a positive message about God's care for each one of us and the way we imitate that care, rather than a negative message about how we've ghastly failed and we should have witch hunts for those that we hold accountable, which I don't think is the culture that the church should be based on. Yeah. We all want to do better, but there are different ways of doing better. I think the church actually has made immense strides in this. It's invested enormous amounts in this. It's sometimes done a pretty poor job of making survivors and victims the center of its concerns. And I think it's paid a very heavy price for that. And I hope that's a culture that's now changed.
Yeah.
But this needs to be a conversation mostly about the future.
Yeah, it's good. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone who is commenting on this. This is very helpful thoughts in the chat. And as always, do send your thoughts and questions into the chat and contribute to the conversation, because it's great to have your thoughts and some interesting ones there about safeguarding and the church. So thank you. Sam, you also mentioned there the lectionary readings for that week, which we're going to look at. As you said, they're not necessarily appropriate for if you are doing Safeguarding Sunday. My initial thought to them was they all seem very apocalyptic. I don't know whether there's a particular reason for that, if they are intentionally.
Yes. This is a bit of a funny Sunday, because in England particularly, because you've got All Saints, then you've got Remembrance, then you've got this Sunday, then you've got Christ the King, or Reign of Christ, as sometimes called now, and then Advent Sunday, and then off you go into Christmas. So this is the other one. And I will confess that I've sometimes thought quietly to myself, um, certainly in the days when I used to attend the American Academy of Religion in America, and it unfortunately turned out I wasn't able to be the preacher for that weekend because I was away, that is not the end of the world. Because, however, and we probably should start with the gospel because that
Okay.
is, the one that focuses this conversation. It is about the end of the world, and that's a difficult subject. I mean, the central reason, and I think if I was preaching this Sunday, I would, and it hadn't been Safeguarding Sunday, then I think you absolutely have to, this is a sort of elephant in the room Sunday. There are other elephant in the room Sundays, but this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest. And the reason I say that is Jesus appears to have suggested that the salvation he brought would be completed just a short time later by his second coming, and by the whole 9 yards being wrapped up. That isn't a mixed metaphor. There's no obvious signs that happened. So, he says, stay in the city at the end of Luke's gospel. Now, Pentecost, in a sense, is a kind of coming, and the church has, in some ways, sort of settled for Pentecost, as it were. But I think, in terms of trusting in the authority and divinity of Christ, this is an elephant in the room. It really is a big problem. Now, of course, it's one of those things where the only testimony we have that Jesus assumed the end of the world is found in Gospels that were written after the period when the end of the world was expected to have happened by people who knew it hadn't happened. So they knew what they were doing in some sense by writing this down. If they were embarrassed about it, if they felt it was an obstacle to faith, they could have edited it out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of circular. And these are the kind of things that a congregation might not have grasped. So these are things that are worth pointing out. I think it's important to, a sermon on this subject, to point out both of those things. It's prima facie a problem. But if you think about it, the people, I remember years ago, I had a placement student for a long weekend. I think this person was on a non-residential course, and rather than coming for a whole month or something as placement students did, this student came for a long weekend. And I sent them to see various people in the community because I thought that was the best use of their time to get to understand the ministry on that parish. And the student came back and said, I realize that your ministry is really rubbish and, is dreadful, and what you're trying to do is very patriarchal and patronizing. And, I'm sorry I feel that, but I thought I ought to say that on the basis of the conversations I've had. And I said just gently, you know that I chose the people I sent you to, and I knew the people quite well that I sent you to, and I had a pretty good idea of what they were going to say to you. I'm just saying that, and the student just, she sort of, yeah, I suppose maybe. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think we made much point to send the student just to people who thought I was amazing. I mean, I couldn't have found half a dozen of those people anyway, probably. But so it's a bit like that with reading these apocalyptic passages in the Gospels. Is the Gospel writers knew, I know what you're thinking, but I'm going to say it anyway. So, you have to weigh those kind of things up. So, it is a challenging Sunday to preach, but there are a lot of important things to say about the end of the world. And, the basic distinction, and it goes back to what I was just, what often wonder about the church in response to the safeguarding crisis, is that the response tends to be very bureaucratic and procedural. And just to say, if you follow these 16 steps, nothing can possibly go wrong. And there's a, to use some technical language, there's a teleology about that, which is everything is oriented towards a particular end. And what it has in common with a kind of teleology is it has tremendous confidence in our ability to produce the outcomes we want from the actions we design to produce those outcomes. It really does have a great sense of assurance. If you follow the procedure, all will be well. But Christian theology is not teleological in that sense, it's eschatological. That's to say, the difference between teleology and eschatology is teleology, we work our way towards the end, and all our actions are oriented towards the end, whereas eschatology, it comes towards us.
Yeah.
So biblical hope, I mean, I never use the word biblical really, but a theological understanding of hope is that hope is not an optimism, things will probably turn out all right. Neither is it a sort of teleological expectation that if we do the following things, it'll go well. But it's the action of God in bringing something towards us that we neither anticipate nor deserve, and yet is transformative and liberating. So, those are the kinds of themes, I think, if you're going to get into this territory and preach on a passage like this, that you're going to want to be covering.
Yeah.
So, it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's quite theological. But I think that this is a Sunday for a theological sermon like that, rather than going into the details of wars and insurrections. The end will not follow, a nation will rise against nation. I mean, this is the kind of thing that charismatic Pentecostal preaching loves, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Earthquakes, you can't get an earthquake somewhere in the world without someone saying, oh, it fits this bit of prophecy or something.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's helpful. And because it's been wrong 1,000 times.
Quite.
So better to think about, and another theme that I think is helpful. In fact, the first time I ever preached on this Sunday was in, can you believe it, 1991. And I remember I preached a sermon called The End of the World, and I'd just been to Los Alamos, it is, isn't it, where Oppenheimer is all his stuff in the New Mexico desert. And I went to see it when I was in America once, and talked about the difference in the end of the world, as in the last chapter, and the end of the world in terms of the telos and purpose of the world. So, I remember a few people at the time said they'd never thought of it like that. And so, that's a simple distinction which can be helpful.
Do you want to go pick up on anything else specifically in that reading, or should we go?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we should go elsewhere. I'd like to talk a bit about the Isaiah reading.
Let's go to that. So Isaiah 65.
I will be preaching on this reading. I'll be in Richmond, Virginia, on this Sunday, fairly soon. And I will be preaching on this passage. And what this passage reminds me of is a very major, significant, possibly the greatest theological challenge I've ever had, which was to try to understand, when I was working on a council estate in Norwich in the late 90s and early noughties, and we had £35 million of government money from the New Labour New Deal for Communities programme to invest, what restored, regenerated community would actually look like. And I read this passage and thought, it has a number of things. No more shall be an infant who lives but a few days. So we've got a health issue there, and we've got we shall build houses and inhabit them. We've obviously got a housing issue. Then we've got plant vineyards. We've got healthy eating and food. Then we've got a sort of, they shall not build another inhabit. We've got a sort of inequality, social justice element going on there. And we've got the sustainability element of the descendants. So, and then we've got this very aspirational, the wolf and the lamb. Everyone always thinks it's the lion and the lamb, but actually it says the wolf and the lamb. I think the alliteration is the lion. It's the wolf and the lamb shall feed together. So you get a passage like that's in Isaiah 11 and comes up in in 9 Lessons and Carols, which is why people think of it so much.
Mm.
They shall not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain. So, and obviously crime was one of the big themes of our regeneration project. So most of the things that we covered, well, it's called community safety, obviously got to give it a positive name, are in this reading.
Mm.
So I that's what I plan to do in Richmond, is to talk about that experience 25 years ago, and how Isaiah is basically inspiring us in our work to imagine a different social future. It's not a recondite business tucked away in the Old Testament that was just dusty.
Mm.
It's vivid. It's about how to restore the land after the exile. And of course, for I'm about to create new heavens and new earth, the reason why that sounds familiar is that it's lifted straight into Revelation 21. So
Yeah.
I wasn't the only person who thought this passage might be quite handy for thinking about a different future.
Yeah, quite. Feels like a very sort of practical but poetic instruction almost for living God's future now. That
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got it in one.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's go on to Malachi then, which feels like a sort of a slightly more brutal version of a similar thing.
Yeah.
Shorter.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a bit of this in Handel's Messiah. So again, like all bits in Handel's Messiah, you somehow think it was it Charles Jennens was the librettist, I think. He didn't write it himself. He got out the Bible. But this phrase, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. I actually, I was a bit rude about the readings earlier in terms of Safeguarding Sunday. But, if you were going to do what I've several times on this conversation called an evensong sermon, that's to say one where you take a single text and just play around with it rather than exegete a whole passage or take a theological theme, then this is a text I think would work very well for Safeguarding Sunday, because it's got both righteousness and healing. And that, well, I don't need to say any more, really. It's got the sort of two things that need to be said. There's the justice element about safeguarding, and there's the right action, procedural element, and then there's the healing. Obviously healing is you have to be very careful talking about that. You can't tell someone to be healed or just describe something that suggests that they have been healed when they don't feel they have, and it's none of their business. Having said which, obviously anyone who has been wounded profoundly is looking for healing. Of course they are.
Yeah.
And a nuanced discussion of what healing can possibly mean after you've been profoundly hurt is the sort of thing you can preach on every Sunday, really.
What I mean, obviously we get it at Christmas as well, the risen with healing in his wings sort of thing. What does that image mean, though? The sort of healing in your wings. I mean,
Well, haven't you heard Bette Midler? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I think she sort of nailed it, didn't she?
Yeah.
No, I mean it's very similar to those who wait upon the Lord shall rise up with wings like eagles at the end of Isaiah. Is it Isaiah 40 or 55? One of those.
Right.
40, I think. Yeah, I mean it's a very figurative thing, but I think we can feel the power of it. It's being lifted up. I mean, being lifted up is a hugely significant theological theme scripturally, because it refers to both the cross and the resurrection, and ascension.
Yeah.
So it's a very profound motif, I would say. There's a lot. It's only one verse, but you can do an awful lot with that. It's only half a verse, actually. It's only 2a.
Yes. Quite. Good. Okay.
So, I mean, I suppose to talk about that slightly more specifically, on a pastoral level, for most people, a wound is not something that heals. It is something that can be surrounded with blessings. So what I mean by that is, if you have a scar, hoping and praying and having plastic surgery to make the scar go away may not be the answer. The answer may be to so surround that scar with good things that it is no longer the dominant feature of your face.
And then it becomes also, there's something I'm going to completely misquote you here, but something about making it beautiful.
Yeah, if it can't be happy, make it beautiful is the
Yeah.
phrase that I like to use. And the analogy that I would give, I don't think it's original to me, but is, if you imagine a rupture in a painting. I think someone did that to the Mona Lisa or something, didn't they, a few years ago? If you that scar will still always be there, and so healing isn't necessarily about that rupture being removed. It's about being so painted around that the paint, it's that it's easier to talk in terms of a noise being integrated into a piece of music. It's probably a better analogy. So I think that's that's what healing means. I think for most people in that kind of context, and what people resent is the idea that healing can take away this thing, both because it's kind of part of their identity and they can't imagine. There's no point in pretending otherwise. Obviously, sometimes people cling to these negative things too much. But also it's just not going to happen. So it seems like a fantasy.
Yeah.
But so to talk about how that wound or that wrong note can be embraced and surrounded by other things, which then become a blessing, and it becomes an experience out of which you can be a blessing and have compassion for others. That's a much more constructive way of talking about healing.
Absolutely. Finally, briefly, shall we go back to our friends in 2 Thessalonians, which feels like a passage which could get you into all sorts of trouble if read wrongly.
Yes. So anyone unwilling to work should not eat. I think, obviously, if you're writing the Conservative Manifesto for the next election, good luck to you if you are. But I'm not sure it's going to go well. But I think discussing welfare and what that means and what the point of welfare is. I wrote a little book with a couple of colleagues on the 75th anniversary of the Beveridge Report called For Good, which was trying to address these kind of questions. What should welfare mean 75 years after the Beveridge Report, 70 years after the setting up of the welfare state, 80 years now, really? And what should the church's role be in that? And that's a good question. And a very good subject for a sermon. I'm just not sure on both Safeguarding Sunday and on sort of eschatological readings that's possibly the line you want to take. But it's a very important theme, and there's plenty of literature on it, so you don't have to start with a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're just about at time, so I think we will call it a day. But thank you so much, Sam, for your insights.
Thank you. Yeah, and insights about drama.
Absolutely, you're very welcome.
Very interesting.
We will be back very soon, next week. Even though Sam will be on the other side of the world, we will find a way to make that work, and we look forward to that.
Not next time.
Not next week. Sorry, the week
subsequent.
We've got him. We've got him here next week. Don't worry, folks. Thank you all for joining us. It's an absolute